We see a child in a superhero costume, laughing as they hold up a plastic bucket overflowing with candy. We see carved pumpkins with goofy smiles, festive decorations on suburban lawns, and friends gathered at a party. This is our celebration of the strange and the spooky. A night of harmless fun, a time for treats and make-believe. But the ancestor of this night was not about fun. It was not about treats. It was about survival. It was a time when the world of the living and the world of the dead became one, a night of profound fear and sacred duty. How did that ancient, terrifying night become this modern festival of light and sugar? To find the answer, we must go back. Our journey begins not with a date, but with a feeling. Imagine a world covered by an endless forest. The trees are so old and so tall that they block out the sun, creating a permanent twilight on the forest floor. There are no straight roads, no towering cities, only winding paths through the woods and small clearings where people cluster together for warmth and safety. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, moss, and wood smoke. This isn't just a landscape, it's a living thing. Every rustle in the leaves, every shadow that moves at the edge of your vision, is a sign that you are not alone. In this world, silence has a weight. The deep, unbroken quiet of the ancient wilderness is the natural state of things. The only sounds are the wind in the trees, the call of a bird, or the crackle of a fire. Night is not just the absence of day, it is a different kingdom entirely. When the sun disappears below the horizon, a true and total darkness falls, a blackness so complete it feels like a physical presence. This is a world where the stars are not faint specks in a hazy sky, but brilliant diamonds burning in the infinite dark, the only map and the only comfort for those caught outside after sunset. To the people who lived here, the ancient Celts, the world was not divided into the natural and the supernatural. Everything was alive. The gnarled oak tree on the hill was not just wood. It was an elder, a being with memory and spirit. The rushing river was not just water. It was a goddess, powerful and unpredictable, who could give life or take it away. The very stones themselves were thought to hold the memory of the world, witnesses to everything that had ever happened. To live here was to be in a constant conversation with a world that was awake, aware, and watching you at all times. Let us imagine a person from this time. A woman waking in a roundhouse made of wood, earth, and thatch. The first thing she feels is the morning chill, the kind that settles deep in your bones. The first thing she smells is the smoke from the central hearth, a fire that was never allowed to die out. Her world is small and immediate. It is the circle of her family, the familiar faces of her village, the fields they tend, and the dark forest that surrounds it all. Her life is governed not by clocks or calendars, but by the slow, powerful rhythms of the sun, the moon, and the seasons. Her day is a cycle of essential tasks: tending the fire, grinding grain between two heavy stones, fetching water from the sacred well, mending clothes woven from the wool of their own sheep. Every action has a purpose, a meaning tied directly to survival. There is no separation between work and life. To plant a seed is a prayer. To harvest the grain is a ceremony of thanks. To waste anything is to insult the gods and spirits who provided it. Life is a delicate balance, a constant negotiation with the powerful forces that govern the rain, the sun, and the fertility of the land. Fear is a constant companion, but it is a different kind of fear than we know. It is not the fear of abstract worries, but of immediate, tangible things. The fear of a failed harvest, which means a winter of starvation. The fear of a sickness that has no name and no cure. The fear of a wolf pack, their eyes glowing just beyond the firelight. And above all, the fear of angering the spirits. The unseen world is not a distant heaven or hell. It is right here, woven into the fabric of everyday life, and its inhabitants must be respected and appeased. Her connection to her community is absolute. She knows every person in her village, their parents and their grandparents. Stories are not read from books. They are told around the fire by the elders, the keepers of the tribe's memory. These stories explain the creation of the world, the deeds of gods and heroes, and the sacred laws of their people. A person's identity is not individual. It is tied completely to their kin, their ancestors, and their tribe. To be cast out, to be alone, was considered a fate worse than death itself, because to be without your people was to be a ghost while you still lived. The world of the Celts was not a single unified empire. It was a vast collection of tribes spread across Europe, from Ireland to Turkey. They were a people bound not by a central king, but by a shared language, a similar artistic style, and a profoundly deep spiritual understanding of the world. They were fierce warriors, skilled metalworkers, and brilliant artists, but they left behind no grand histories of their own. Their most important knowledge, their sacred beliefs and rituals, was never written down. It was a secret, passed from the lips of one generation to the ears of the next, and much of it is now lost to time. To understand their festivals, we must first understand their concept of reality. For them, our world was not the only one. There was another place, a realm that existed parallel to our own. It was not above us in the sky or below us in the earth. It was right beside us, a mirror world hidden behind a thin veil. This place was called the Otherworld. It was a land of eternal youth, where the gods and spirits lived, where there was no sickness or time. But it was not a paradise for mortals. It was a place of great power and great danger. The veil between our world and the Otherworld was not always in the same place. It was thin in certain locations. An ancient burial mound, a misty island on a lake, a clearing deep within the forest, or a circle of standing stones could be a gateway. A person might stumble into such a place by accident and vanish from our world forever. Or they might return moments later, only to find that hundreds of years had passed. The stories were filled with tales of mortals who crossed the veil, some finding magic and wonder, but many more finding only sorrow and loss. The inhabitants of this other world were not gentle fairies or playful elves. They were the As-Si, the people of the mounds. They were the tribes of gods and spirits who had been in the land long before humans. They were seen as powerful, majestic, and deeply territorial. They could be generous, offering gifts of inspiration or good fortune, but they could also be terrifyingly cruel if they were offended. A farmer would leave out a bowl of milk or a portion of the harvest not as a quaint custom, but as a serious offering, a payment of rent to the true owners of the land. This belief shaped every part of life. A sudden illness in the family, a cow that stopped giving milk, a tool that inexplicably broke. These were not seen as random chance. They were often interpreted as the result of some offense given to the good people, the AOC. Perhaps someone had built their house over a fairy path, or cut down a sacred hawthorn tree. Life was a constant act of diplomacy with these powerful, unseen neighbors. It required a deep understanding of etiquette, of what was permitted and what was forbidden, to maintain the fragile peace between the two worlds. The spiritual leaders who could navigate this complex relationship were the Druids. We often imagine them as old men with white beards, but they were much more than that. They were the philosophers, scientists, judges, and spiritual guides of Celtic society. It took up to 20 years of training to become a Druid, a time spent memorizing a vast library of sacred poems, laws, and histories. They understood the movements of the stars, the medicinal properties of plants, and most importantly, the secret ways to communicate with the gods and mediate between the human world and the other world. Their authority was immense. For the Druids and the people they served, time was not a straight line moving from past to future. It was a circle, a great wheel that turned endlessly. The seasons were not just changes in weather, they were cosmic events, moments in a grand, repeating story of life, death, and rebirth. Each turn of this wheel brought the world closer to or further from the other world. The purpose of their great festivals was to mark these turning points, to ensure the wheel kept turning correctly, and to manage the powerful energies that were released at these special times of the year. This great wheel of the year was marked by 4 major festivals. They were not holidays in our sense of the word, not a day off from work. They were sacred duties, moments when the entire community had to come together to perform rituals that kept the cosmos in balance. These were the fire festivals, and they were the hinges upon which the year turned. They marked the midpoints between the solstices and the equinoxes, the true moments of seasonal change. Each festival had its own purpose, its own mood, and its own magic. The year began with the festival of Imbolc at the beginning of February. This was a quiet, hopeful celebration. It marked the first stirrings of spring, even when snow was still on the ground. It was a festival of light and purity, dedicated to the goddess Brigid. People would light candles in their homes to encourage the sun to grow stronger. It was a time for cleaning, for preparing for the new season of life, and for celebrating the birth of the first lambs. It was a gentle promise that the darkness of winter would not last forever. Next came Beltane, celebrated at the beginning of May. This was the opposite of Imbolc's quiet hope. Beltane was a festival of wild, explosive life. It celebrated the full arrival of summer, fertility, and passion. Great bonfires were lit on hilltops, and the people and their cattle would walk between the 2 fires. The smoke was believed to purify them and protect them from harm in the coming year. It was a joyous, unrestrained celebration of the sun's power, a time when the world was bursting with new growth, and the life force of nature was at its absolute peak. After the peak of summer came Lughnasadh at the beginning of August. This was the festival of the first harvest. It was a time of both celebration and anxiety. The community gave thanks for the grain that was now ready to be cut, but they also knew that the sun's power was beginning to wane. It was a festival of gatherings, of tribal assemblies, of games, and of feasting. It was a celebration of skill and a time to enjoy the fruits of their labor, but it was shadowed by the knowledge that the bright half of the year was coming to an end. These 3 festivals were important, but one stood above them all. It was the final festival, the hinge that turned the year from light to darkness. It was the most powerful, the most sacred, and the most dangerous time of all. It marked the end of the harvest, the end of summer, and the end of the old year. It was the moment when the gates to the other world swung wide open, and the boundary between the living and the dead completely dissolved. This festival was known as Samhain, and its echoes are still felt in our world today. Samhain, pronounced Samhain, was not just another festival, it was the Celtic New Year. It represented the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. For a people whose lives were tied to the land, this was a moment of profound significance. The last of the crops were brought in from the fields. The herds of cattle were driven back from their summer pastures. The world around them was dying. The leaves were falling from the trees, the days were growing shorter, and the long, cold darkness of winter was about to begin. This was a time of reckoning. The community would decide which animals were strong enough to survive the winter, and which would have to be slaughtered. This act, while necessary for survival, filled the air with a sense of death. Samhain was a festival that looked death directly in the face. It acknowledged that for life to continue, there must be death. The sun god was losing his battle with the forces of darkness. The land goddess was entering her slumber. The world was becoming a place for spirits and shadows. The central idea of Samhain was that, on this one night, the veil between the worlds became so thin that it practically disappeared. It was not just a gateway in a specific place. The entire world became a threshold. The spirits of the other world, the ISC, could walk freely among mortals. And more importantly, the spirits of the human dead could return. They could come back to the world of the living to visit their old homes and seek the warmth of the fire they once knew. Imagine what this felt like for an ordinary person. For weeks, the community had been preparing. The harvest was in, the animals were secured. As the sun set on the day of Samhain, a great silence would fall over the village. All the hearth fires in every home were put out. This was a symbolic act, plunging the entire community into a cold, primal darkness. It was a gesture of respect for the coming night, an emptying of the world to make space for the spirits who were about to arrive. The darkness was absolute, a mirror of the primordial chaos that existed before the world was made. In this darkness, the community would gather together. Led by the Druids, they would build a massive, sacred bonfire. This was not a fire for warmth or celebration in the way of Beltane. This was a ritual fire, a beacon of order in a world descending into chaos. The flames were lit with great ceremony, and their light was the only thing holding the terrifying darkness at bay. It was a symbol of the sun's life, however weak, and a promise of its eventual return. From this one sacred fire, a torch would be lit for every family. The head of each household would carry a burning flame from the community bonfire back to their own home. They would use it to relight their own hearth. This act reconnected every family to the sacred center of the tribe. It was a powerful symbol of unity and renewal, a way of carrying the divine spark of the sun through the longest and darkest nights of winter. Their home was now a sacred space, protected by the fire that was born from the community's ritual. But the night was still full of danger. While the spirits of beloved ancestors were welcomed, they were not the only ones who could cross the veil. There were other entities, malevolent spirits and mischievous beings from the other world, who could now wander the earth and cause harm to the living. To venture outside on this night was to risk being carried away, to become lost between the worlds forever. People stayed indoors, close to the safety of their newly lit hearth fire, telling stories of the ancestors and waiting for the dawn. To protect themselves from the harmful spirits, people would leave offerings of food and drink outside their homes. This was an act of appeasement, a way of saying, "Take this gift and pass us by." But they also practiced a form of disguise. They would wear costumes, often made of animal skins and heads, and masks with grotesque features. The purpose of this was not for fun, but for camouflage. It was believed that if you looked like a spirit yourself, the truly dangerous ones would mistake you for one of their own and leave you alone. This tradition of dressing up was a deeply serious ritual. By putting on the mask of a beast or a monster, a person was temporarily shedding their own identity. They were participating in the chaos of the night. They were blurring the line between human and spirit, order and chaos, life and death. Young men, in particular, might roam the village in these disguises, playing pranks and creating a sense of mischief that mirrored the unpredictable nature of the spirits themselves. It was a way of controlling the chaos by briefly becoming a part of it. Another practice was born from the thinning veil: divination. Because the boundaries between worlds and between times were so weak, Samhain was believed to be the best time of year to see into the future. The Druids would perform powerful rituals, perhaps by studying the patterns of smoke from the sacred bonfire or the way certain animal bones cracked in the heat. They sought to answer crucial questions for the community. Would the winter be harsh? Would the next harvest be bountiful? Would the tribe be victorious in a coming battle? Ordinary people also practiced their own forms of fortune-telling. Many of these rituals involved apples and nuts, symbols of the harvest and of immortality. A young woman might try to peel an apple in one continuous strand. If she succeeded, she would throw the peel over her shoulder, and the shape it formed on the ground was believed to be the initial of her future husband. Another game involved two nuts placed in the fire, one for a young man and one for a young woman. If the nuts burned quietly together, the couple would have a happy union. These games, which seem so charming to us now, were born from a deep and genuine anxiety about the future. In a world with no certainty, where life was often short and difficult, the desire to know what was coming was powerful. Samhain offered a fleeting chance to peer through the mists of time, to gain some small sense of control over a destiny that often seemed to be in the hands of powerful, unseen forces. It was a night of deep spiritual introspection, a time to look both backwards to the ancestors and forwards to the year ahead. The focus on the dead was central to the entire festival. This was not a morbid obsession, but a deep and abiding respect for those who came before. The ancestors were not gone. They were simply in the other world. They were still considered part of the tribe. At the Samhain feast, a place would be set at the table for the family members who had passed away during the year. The door would be left unlatched so their spirits could enter and join the family one last time, sharing in the warmth and the food of the living. Imagine a child sitting by the fire on this night. They are warm and safe inside, but they can hear the wind howling outside. The elders are telling stories of the great heroes and of the family members they have lost. The child knows that their grandfather, who passed away in the spring, might be in the room with them right now, a silent, invisible guest. This belief created a powerful sense of continuity, a feeling that life and death were not opposites, but two parts of the same, unending circle. The family was a chain that could not be broken by death. The world the Celts inhabited was one where spirit was everywhere, woven into the very fabric of existence. Their gods were not distant, abstract beings in a faraway heaven. They were powerful, personal forces who walked the land, who fell in love, who fought in battles, and who could be met at any misty crossroads. These deities were complex, often embodying contradictory forces. A goddess could be a figure of fertility and motherhood, but also a terrifying bringer of war and destruction. They were as wild and unpredictable as nature itself. One of the most important deities was the Dagda, whose name means the good god. He was not good in the sense of being morally pure, but good in the sense of being good at everything. He was a father figure, a powerful warrior, and a master of magic. He possessed a great cauldron that could never be emptied, providing endless food for his people, a symbol of abundance and hospitality. He also had a magical harp that could control the emotions of all who heard it, making them laugh, weep, or fall into a deep sleep. The Dagda was a god of the tribe, a protector and a provider. For an ordinary farmer, the Dagda represented the hope of a full belly and a secure winter. An offering made to him was a plea for the land to remain fertile, for the community to be protected from its enemies, and for the great cauldron of the earth to continue providing its bounty. He was a god of order, life, and earthly power, a comforting presence in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. His magic was the magic of life itself. But for every force of life and order, there was an equal and opposite force. If the Dagda represented the security of the tribe, his counterpart represented the chaos of war and the sovereignty of the land itself. She was a goddess of prophecy, of battle, and of fate. She could appear as a beautiful young woman, an old hag, or as a crow, flying over the battlefield to decide who would live and who would die. She was not one goddess, but three sisters, a powerful triple deity whose presence was felt in every conflict. Her name was the Morrigan, which can be translated as the Great Queen or the Phantom Queen. She did not fight with a sword or a spear. Her weapons were fear, confusion, and magic. She could fill warriors with a terrible battle fury or strike them with a paralyzing panic. To see her before a battle was a terrifying omen of death. A warrior praying to her was not asking for protection in the way they might pray to the Dagda. They were asking for the wild, untamable spirit of the fight to enter them. The Morrigan represents a key part of the Celtic worldview. The land itself was a goddess. It was not just dirt and rock. It was a living, conscious entity. To rule a kingdom, a king had to symbolically marry the land goddess. The Morrigan was the ultimate expression of this sovereignty. She was the wild, untamable spirit of the land itself. To defy her was to defy nature, a foolish act that could only end in destruction. She was a reminder that humanity did not rule the world. They were merely guests on land that belonged to ancient, powerful gods. Another key figure was Lugh of the Long Arm. He was a god of many talents, a master of every art and every craft. He was a smith, a poet, a warrior, and a magician. Lugh was a youthful, brilliant god associated with the sun, but not the sun at its gentle peak. He was the sun of the late summer, the fierce, brilliant light of the harvest season. The great festival of Lughnasadh was held in his honor, a celebration of his victory over the spirits of blight and famine, ensuring the people would have food for the winter. These are just a few of the many gods and goddesses who filled the Celtic pantheon. What is important to understand is that they were not abstract concepts. For the people who believed in them, these deities were real. Their stories were the history of the world. A sudden storm was the anger of a sky god. The inspiration for a beautiful piece of metalwork was a gift from a god of craftsmanship. To live in this world was to feel the presence of the gods in every sunrise, every harvest, and every battle. So we have a world that is alive with spirit. We have a people whose lives are governed by the turning of the seasons. And we have a set of beliefs that see the wall between worlds as thin and passable. This was the stage upon which the great drama of the festivals played out. These were not just holidays. They were the mechanisms that kept the universe running. The rituals performed at Beltane did not just celebrate summer. They were believed to be necessary to actually make summer happen. And no ritual was more important than the one that took place at Samhain. This was the moment of greatest cosmic instability. The sun was weak, the darkness was growing, and the dead were walking. The world was holding its breath. The survival of the community and the rebirth of the world in the spring depended entirely on navigating this dangerous night correctly. Everything had to be done in the proper way, according to the ancient laws, to ensure that the wheel of time would turn once more towards the light. The entire community was involved. The Druid priests orchestrated the great rituals at the sacred bonfire. The chieftain ensured the laws of the tribe were followed. The mothers and fathers protected their homes and honored their ancestors. Even the young men in their fearsome masks played a role, embodying the chaos that was loose in the world. Everyone had a part to play in this great cosmic drama. It was a shared responsibility, a sacred duty that bound the tribe together in the face of the encroaching darkness. This time, Samhain, was when the great myths were not just told but were believed to be happening again. It was on this night that legendary heroes were said to have passed into the other world or fought epic battles against monstrous beings. It was a time when the world of myth and the world of humans became one. The stories told around the fire were not just entertainment. They were a living history, a map of the spiritual landscape that everyone was now traveling through together until the sun rose again. This brings us back to the heart of the festival. It was a confrontation with the two things that humans have always feared and respected most: darkness and death. Samhain did not try to hide from these things. It did not pretend they did not exist. Instead, it created a sacred space where darkness could be honored and death could be invited in as a guest. It was an act of profound courage, a belief that by facing the darkness directly, the community could ensure the return of the light. This was the world they lived in, a landscape alive with consciousness, where the gods were as real as the rain and the ancestors were just a whisper away. A world where time was a circle, and humanity's most important task was to help it keep turning through ritual and respect. Their festivals were the machinery that kept the cosmos in balance, pushing back the darkness and pulling forth the light. It was a delicate and sometimes terrifying balance, one that required constant attention and a deep connection to the spiritual world. But Samhain was the ultimate test of this balance. It was the point of maximum danger and maximum possibility. It was the night when all the rules were suspended. The dead could share a meal with the living. The future could be glimpsed in the flames of a fire. A person could become a monster simply by putting on a mask. It was the one night of the year where the solid, predictable world dissolved into a dream, a place of magic, memory, and fear. Everything we have described, the bonfires, the costumes, the offerings, the belief in returning spirits, formed the foundation of this ancient night. This was the original festival, a sacred and serious ritual designed to guide the community through the darkest point of the year. But how did this night of ancestral spirits and ritual disguise, a night balanced on the knife edge between worlds, transform into something so completely different? What happened to the old gods, and how did their most sacred night become our modern Halloween? For centuries, this was the way of the world. The great wheel of the year turned, and the people turned with it, their lives woven into the fabric of myth and season. But this world, isolated and ancient, was not to last forever. A new story was coming, carried across the sea on the winds of change. It arrived not with an army of conquest, but in the hearts of a few determined men. They spoke of a world that was entirely different. A world with only one God, a God who was not in the rivers and stones, but who lived in a kingdom of light far above the sky. Imagine a Celtic farmer, his hands deep in the soil he knows to be alive, listening to one of these newcomers for the first time. The missionary speaks of a world created in 7 days by a single all-powerful being. He speaks of a single life, followed by an eternal judgment. There is a place of endless joy called heaven, and a place of endless torment called hell. For the farmer, whose beliefs are circular, where ancestors return and life is reborn each spring, this new story must have sounded like a strange and rigid tale. A story with a beginning, a middle, and a terrifyingly final end. The new faith offered a different kind of hope and a different kind of fear. The hope was one of personal salvation, a promise that your individual soul could find eternal peace in a perfect paradise. This was a powerful idea for people living hard lives in a difficult world, but the fear was also personal. It was the fear of sin, of offending this one, all-seeing God, and being condemned to eternal punishment. This was a very different fear from appeasing the local spirits of a stream or a hill. It was a cosmic judgment from which there was no escape. The clash was not just between gods. It was a clash between two entirely different ways of seeing reality. The Celtic world was a place of endless negotiation with countless spirits, a world of shades of gray. The new Christian faith presented a world of absolutes: one God, one devil, one truth, one path to salvation. It sought to replace the chaotic, living tapestry of the old world with a clear, ordered, and hierarchical map of the cosmos. For the Druids, the keepers of the ancient ways, this wasn't just a new religion, it was an existential threat to the very structure of their universe. The Druids would have seen these missionaries as profoundly dangerous. These men did not respect the sacred groves. They did not make offerings at the holy wells. They claimed that the powerful gods of the land were nothing more than false idols or even demons in disguise. The power of the Druids came from their deep knowledge of the old ways, the secret names of spirits, the proper times for ritual. This new faith declared all of that knowledge to be worthless, even wicked. It was a fundamental challenge to their authority and their understanding of the world. But the new faith did not triumph through argument alone. It spread through a slow and patient process of absorption. The leaders of this new church were wise. They understood that you could not simply erase thousands of years of belief overnight. A famous church leader, Pope Gregory, sent a letter to his missionaries with a brilliant strategy. He told them not to destroy the sacred places of the people. Instead, he said they should build their own churches on the same spots, turning the old power towards a new purpose. This strategy was incredibly effective. A sacred well that had been dedicated for centuries to a Celtic goddess like Brigid was not closed down. Instead, it was rededicated to a Christian saint, Saint Brigid, who conveniently had many of the same attributes as the old goddess. A circle of standing stones, a place of ancient power, would have a cross erected in its center. The people could continue to come to their sacred places, but now the prayers they offered were directed to a new god. The spiritual geography of the land was slowly being rewritten, layer by layer. And what happened to the old gods themselves? They did not simply vanish. They were demoted. They were transformed. The powerful deities, like the Dagda and Lugh, could not be erased from the stories the people told around the fire. So, in the new Christian tales, they became something else. Some were turned into saints, their old myths becoming the stories of miracles. Others were made smaller, driven from the world of humans. They retreated into the ancient burial mounds, the hollow hills. They became the fairies, the little people of folklore, their divine power reduced to mischievous magic. The goddess Brigid is the perfect example of this process. In the old world, she was a mighty deity of poetry, healing, and smithcraft. She was associated with fire, with the first stirrings of spring, and with the festival of Imbolc. When Christianity arrived, she was so beloved that she could not be suppressed. So she was transformed. She became Saint Brigid of Kildare, one of Ireland's most important saints. Her feast day was set on February 1st, the same day as the old festival of Imbolc. The goddess became a saint, but her sacred fire continued to burn. The other festivals were also absorbed. Beltane, the great fire festival of summer, was too wild, too overtly pagan in its celebrations of fertility. While its date was close to the Christian feast of Pentecost, its core practices were driven underground. The great bonfires on the hills continued for centuries, but they were slowly detached from their original sacred meaning. They became folk customs, traditions people followed because their grandparents had always done so. The reason for lighting the fires, to purify and protect, was gradually forgotten by most, even as the flames still lit up the night sky. Lughnasadh, the harvest festival, was also given a new identity. Its date was near the Christian holiday of Lammas, a word which means loaf mass, a day when the first loaf of bread from the new harvest was blessed in the church. The old gatherings, the games, and the tribal assemblies of Lughnasadh faded away, replaced by church services and local fairs. The celebration of the harvest continued, but now the thanks was given not to the god Lugh, but to the one Christian God who provided the bounty. The old ways were not destroyed, they were hollowed out and filled with new meaning. But of all the festivals, Samhain posed the greatest challenge to the new faith. It was the most important night of the Celtic year, the moment when the other world and the human world became one. Its core belief, that the spirits of the dead returned to walk the earth, was deeply ingrained in the people. This idea could not be easily erased. The church understood that it had to confront Samhain directly. It had to capture this powerful moment in the year and claim it for its own. This began a spiritual battle for the soul of the darkest night. The church's strategy was bold and direct. In the 8th century, it officially moved one of its most important feasts to November 1st, the day after Samhain. This feast was called All Saints' Day. In the language of the time, saints were also called Hallows. So November 1st became All Hallows' Day. It was a day to honor all the Christian saints, the holy dead who were in heaven. The church was placing its own army of sacred spirits directly on top of the most spiritually charged day of the Celtic calendar. This was a masterful move. The night before a major feast day was always a time of vigil and preparation, known as an eve. Therefore, the night of October 31st, the ancient night of Samhain, now became All Hallows' Eve. Over the centuries, this name was shortened and slurred together in common speech, eventually becoming the word we know today, Halloween. The very name of our modern festival is a ghost, an echo of this centuries-long process of religious transformation. The old night was given a new name and a new purpose. Imagine a Celtic villager a few generations after this change. They have been taught in the new church about the glory of the saints in heaven. They celebrate All Hallows Day to honor them. But when the sun goes down on All Hallows Eve, the old feelings return. The old stories are still whispered around the fire. They still feel that the veil between the worlds is thin. They still believe that spirits are walking in the darkness outside. The old instincts and the new teachings begin to mix together, creating a strange and fascinating blend of beliefs. The new Christian framework changed how the spirits were perceived. In the old Celtic world, the returning dead and the spirits of the AOC were not necessarily good or evil. They were simply powerful. They had to be respected and appeased. But Christian theology had a much clearer division. There was God and his angels, and there was the devil and his demons. The spirits that walked on All Hallows Eve were now increasingly seen through this lens. They were not just ancestors. They were potentially dangerous souls from purgatory or even evil demons, let loose from hell for one night. This new fear of evil spirits gave the old customs a new meaning. The practice of wearing costumes and masks continued, but its purpose shifted. It was no longer about disguising yourself to blend in with the powerful spirits of the other world. Instead, it became a way to fool the devil. It was thought that if you dressed up as a demon or a goblin, the real evil spirits would mistake you for one of them and leave you unharmed. The act remained the same, but the belief behind it was slowly being reshaped by the new religion. The bonfires also continued to burn brightly on this night. For the Celts, the fire was a sacred symbol of the sun, a beacon of purity and a source of protection. The church reinterpreted this practice. The fires were now said to represent the souls of Christians trapped in a place called purgatory, a waiting area between heaven and hell. People would light the fires and say prayers to help their loved ones ascend to heaven more quickly. The fires still offered protection, but now it was protection from the fires of damnation, a light against a specifically Christian darkness. The tradition of leaving food out for the spirits also persisted, but it too was changed. It was no longer an offering to appease the powerful fairy folk or the ancestors. Instead, a new practice emerged called souling. Poor people, and often children, would go from house to house on All Hallows Eve, singing prayers for the dead. In return, they would be given small soul cakes. These were little breads or cakes, and each one eaten was said to represent a soul being freed from purgatory. It was a Christian act of charity layered directly over an ancient pagan ritual of appeasement. We can see the beginnings of a familiar tradition here. People going door to door, receiving treats in exchange for a ritual performance. The act of souling is a clear ancestor of our modern trick-or-treating. The soul cakes are the ancestors of our Halloween candy. The core elements of the ancient festival were proving to be incredibly resilient. They survived by adapting, by taking on new Christian meanings that allowed them to continue, even as the original beliefs that created them were being pushed further and further into the past. This blending of worlds was not always a peaceful process. For centuries, the official church teachings and the older folk beliefs existed side by side, often in an uneasy truce. A person could go to Mass in the morning and that same night leave a bowl of milk out for the fairies, seeing no contradiction. They believed in the one Christian God, but they also felt it was wise to respect the old spirits of the land. This created a rich and complex tapestry of belief, where the new religion was the official thread, but the colors and patterns of the old ways still shone through. The Druids, as an organized class of priests and scholars, disappeared. Their oral tradition, without new generations to memorize it, was broken. Much of their sacred knowledge was lost forever. What we know today comes from the writings of their enemies, the Romans, and from the Christian monks who later wrote down the old myths. These monks preserved the stories of the gods and heroes, but they wrote them from a Christian perspective, often presenting the old deities as mere mortal kings or magical beings, stripping them of their divinity. So the great gods were gone, replaced by one God, The Druids were gone, replaced by priests. The sacred meaning of the festivals was gone, replaced by Christian feast days, but the instincts remained. The feeling that May was a time of fertility and life. The feeling that August was a time of harvest and thanks. And most powerfully, the feeling that the end of October was a time when the world became thin. A time when strange things could happen, when the spirits of the dead were close. This feeling could not be legislated or prayed away. This deep, intuitive feeling is what kept the old customs alive. People continued to tell fortunes with apples and nuts on All Hallows' Eve, not as a sacred ritual to a Celtic god, but as a fun parlor game, a bit of harmless superstition. They told ghost stories around the fire, not because they were performing a sacred duty to their ancestors, but because it was a thrilling and spooky way to pass the darkest night of the year. The sacred had become secular. The ritual had become a game. Let us step into the world of a young person in Ireland, perhaps 1,000 years after the arrival of Christianity. It is All Hallows' Eve. They know this night as the vigil for the saints. But they also know it as a night of mischief and magic. They might carve a face into a large turnip, not a pumpkin, and place a hot coal inside to make it glow. They would carry this lantern to scare away evil spirits, or perhaps just to frighten their friends. They are not practicing an ancient Celtic religion, but they are carrying on its legacy. The turnip lanterns had a name. They were called jack-o'-lanterns. The name came from an old folk tale about a man named Stingy Jack. Jack was a trickster who had fooled the devil himself multiple times. When Jack died, he was too sinful to get into heaven, but the devil, keeping his promise never to take his soul, wouldn't let him into hell either. So Jack was condemned to wander the earth for eternity, with only a burning coal inside a carved-out turnip to light his way. This Christian folktale was created to explain an ancient pagan custom. This story shows the process perfectly. The ancient practice of carrying a light to ward off spirits, perhaps once from the sacred Samhain bonfire, is preserved, but its origin is forgotten. A new story, one that fits within a Christian worldview of heaven and hell, is invented to make sense of the tradition. The custom survives, but its soul has been changed. It is no longer about cosmic balance. It is about a clever man who tricked the devil. The profound has become a simple, scary story for children. Over the centuries, this process continued. As the memory of the Druids and the Celtic gods faded into the mists of time, the rituals of Samhain became the folk traditions of Halloween. These traditions were strongest in the Celtic parts of the world, like Ireland and Scotland. The belief in spirits, the dressing in costumes, the carving of lanterns, and the playing of games all continued, passed down from one generation to the next, slowly evolving and changing with each passing year. The sacred night was becoming a night of community fun. The old fear was still present, but it was becoming a different kind of fear. It was the thrill of being scared, the fun of a ghost story, not the genuine existential dread of your ancestors. The boundary between worlds was no longer a terrifying reality to be navigated with care, but a theme for a party. People were no longer trying to appease the spirits. They were now imitating them for amusement. The transformation was nearly complete. The festival had been Christianized, and what remained of the old ways was becoming simple folklore. For a long time, these traditions remained largely confined to Ireland and the surrounding regions. In other parts of Europe, different traditions grew up around this time of year. But a great change was coming to the world. A terrible famine would strike Ireland, forcing millions of people to leave their homes and cross the ocean in search of a new life. They would carry very little with them, but they would bring their stories, their songs, and their ancient traditions. They were about to bring Halloween to a new continent, America. When the Irish immigrants arrived in America in the 19th century, they brought their All Hallows' Eve customs with them. They brought the tradition of dressing in costumes and going door to door for small treats. They brought their fortune-telling games with apples, and they brought their tradition of carving lanterns to scare away evil spirits. But in the New World, they found that turnips were not as common as a large native orange gourd that was much easier to carve, the pumpkin. And so, the turnip of the Old World became the pumpkin of the New. In America, these Irish traditions mixed with the customs of other immigrant groups, like the English and the Scottish. The holiday began to lose its last remaining spiritual connections. It was no longer about praying for souls in purgatory or warding off the devil. It became a community festival, a night for children, for parties, and for playing pranks. The focus shifted away from the dead and onto the living. The solemnity was almost entirely replaced by a spirit of fun and mischief. The pranks on Halloween night became a major part of the celebration. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a night known for harmless and sometimes not so harmless tricks. Tipping over outhouses, soaping windows, and tying people's doors shut were common activities. This was a distant, chaotic echo of the old Samhain belief that on this one night, the normal rules of society were suspended. The mischief of the Aussie had been transformed into the mischief of neighborhood children. To curb this rising tide of vandalism, communities started to organize Halloween events. They held parades, costume contests, and neighborhood parties. The focus was on providing safe, fun activities to keep young people out of trouble. This was the birth of the organized, family-friendly Halloween we know today. At the same time, the practice of going door to door was repopularized as, quote, trick-or-treating, a way to replace the random pranks with a more controlled exchange of treats for the promise of no tricks. Then, in the 20th century, another force began to shape the holiday: commerce. Companies realized there was money to be made from Halloween. The production of costumes, decorations, and candy exploded. The festival was no longer just a folk tradition, it was a major commercial event. The symbols of the holiday, the witch, the ghost, the black cat, were standardized and mass-produced. These symbols were themselves ghosts of older beliefs, stripped of their original power and turned into cartoonish figures on a candy wrapper. The witch is a perfect example. In the Old World, the wise women who understood herbs and nature were respected. During the times of religious persecution, they became figures of evil, servants of the devil. In the modern era, this terrifying figure was transformed again, this time into a child's costume, a green-faced character with a pointy hat and a broomstick. The journey of the witch from a figure of wisdom to a figure of demonic evil, and finally, to a harmless Halloween costume, mirrors the journey of the festival itself. So the threads of our story come together. The sacred fire of the Druids, lit to hold back the darkness, becomes the candle in a smiling pumpkin. The terrifying masks, worn to fool deadly spirits, become the plastic superhero costumes of children. The offerings left for the powerful people of the mounds become candy given out to neighbors. The solemn visit from the ancestral dead becomes a ghost story told at a party. A night of cosmic danger has become a night of manufactured fun. The transformation seems absolute. The ancient Celts would not recognize our modern celebration. The deep spiritual significance, the very heart of Samhain, appears to have been lost completely, buried under centuries of religious change and decades of commercialism. The connection to the turning of the seasons, the end of the harvest, and the beginning of the dark half of the year is almost entirely forgotten. Halloween is now just a date on the calendar, disconnected from the great wheel that once gave it its power. We have followed the journey from the misty forests of ancient Europe to the brightly lit streets of a modern suburb. We have seen how a profound spiritual event was absorbed, reinterpreted, and eventually commercialized. It seems we have our answer. The ancient rituals became modern festivals by having their spiritual souls slowly removed, leaving only the outer shell of their customs. The why was forgotten, leaving only the what, the costumes, the treats, the lanterns, all ghosts of a forgotten world. But perhaps this is not the entire story. Is it possible that something of the old spirit remains, hidden just beneath the surface? When we feel a chill on a dark October night, or when we gather with our community in costume, are we tapping into something older than we realize? The new faith had captured the festival's name and date, reframing it as a night of saints and demons. It pushed the old beliefs into the shadows where they survived as folklore. Let us look at the customs that refused to die, the folk traditions that survived for centuries. These were the practices that were passed down not by priests or books, but from mother to daughter, from father to son. They were the games, the superstitions, and the small household rituals that kept a flicker of the old world alive. These traditions held the memory of Samhain long after its name had been changed and its gods had been banished. They are the bridge between the ancient ritual and our modern party. The fortune-telling games are a powerful example. For centuries, even in a Christian world, young people would gather on Halloween to play games that predicted their future loves. Bobbing for apples was one of the most popular. The apple, a sacred fruit to the Celts and a symbol of the otherworld, became the centerpiece of a game. To capture the apple with your mouth was to capture your future. It was seen as harmless fun, but it was a direct echo of the Samhain belief that this night was a time when the future could be seen. Ghost stories also carried the old spirit forward. The belief that the spirits of the dead walked on this night never truly went away. It simply changed its clothes. The solemn, respectful communion with the ancestors became the thrilling, terrifying tale of a haunted house or a vengeful ghost. The fear was now a form of entertainment, but the core idea that the boundary between the living and the dead is weak on this one night survived intact. Every ghost story told on Halloween is a faint echo of the old belief. Even the idea of mischief has ancient roots. The pranks and chaos of modern Halloween connect back to the idea that Samhain was a time outside of normal time. It was a moment when the world was turned upside down, when spirits could play tricks on the living. The young men in their animal masks causing a stir in the ancient village have their modern descendants in the teenagers' soaping windows. Both are participating in a temporary and sanctioned suspension of the normal rules of society, an idea that is thousands of years old. These folk traditions acted like a secret language, preserving the core themes of the ancient festival without needing to preserve the religion itself. They carried the ideas of transformation, costumes, divination, apple games, and the presence of the supernatural ghost stories through the centuries. They were the tough, resilient roots that kept the memory of Samhain alive underground, even when the official culture above had moved on. They are the reason Halloween feels different from any other holiday. When the Irish and Scottish immigrants brought these traditions to America, they were planting these ancient seeds in new soil. In the melting pot of the New World, these customs found fertile ground. America, a country with a shorter history, was fascinated by these strange and ancient-seeming traditions. The holiday provided a sense of mystery and connection to a deeper, older past that was largely absent from the new nation's own culture. It was adopted and adapted with great enthusiasm. So the modern festival is not just a hollowed-out shell. It is a complex layering of history. The bottom layer is the ancient Celtic foundation, the end of the harvest, the turning of the seasons, and the open veil to the other world. The next layer is the Christian reinterpretation, All Saints' Day, souls in purgatory, and the fear of demons. On top of that is the layer of folk tradition, the games, ghost stories, and mischief that kept the old spirit alive. And finally, there is the top layer of modern commercialism. All of these layers exist at the same time in our modern Halloween. When a child dresses as a ghost and says trick or treat, they are unknowingly participating in a ritual that contains elements from every single one of these historical layers. The ghost costume speaks to the Celtic belief in returning spirits. The act of going door to door echoes the medieval practice of souling. The demand for a treat is the modern, commercialized version of the soul cake. It is all there, mixed together. This is why the festival has such a powerful hold on our imagination. It is not one thing, but many things at once. It allows us to confront our deepest fears of death and the unknown in a safe and playful way. It gives us permission to be someone else for a night, to step outside the boundaries of our normal lives. It connects us to the ancient primal rhythm of the seasons, the feeling that darkness is coming and the world is changing. It does all of this, even if we are not consciously aware of it. The old gods and the ancient rituals did not vanish without a trace. They were transformed, their stories rewritten, and their practices absorbed. They survive as ghosts within our own culture, their voices faint but still audible in our modern festivals. We have seen how Samhain was reshaped by a new faith, and then by a new world. But how do the other festivals, the celebrations of light and life like Beltane, echo in our world today? What happened to the festival of the great bonfires, and where can we find its ghost? To find the ghost of Beltane, we must return to the beginning of May. Imagine the world bursting with life. The trees are covered in fresh green leaves, the fields are filled with wildflowers, and the air is warm and thick with the scent of blossoms. For the ancient Celts, this was a time of pure, untamed energy. The sun god was now at the peak of his power, and the land goddess was fertile and full of life. Beltane was the celebration of their union, a festival of fire, passion, and wild, joyous abandon. It was the polar opposite of Samhain's solemn darkness. The central ritual of Beltane was fire. On Beltane Eve, all the fires in the community would be extinguished, just as they were at Samhain. But this was not a descent into fearful darkness. It was a clearing of the stage for a spectacular rebirth. On the highest hill, the Druids would light a great bonfire, not from any existing flame, but from the friction of two sacred pieces of wood. This was need fire, a pure, new flame that represented the fresh, new life of summer. From this one fire, all the hearths in the village would be relit, bringing the sun's power into every home. This was not just symbolic. The fire and its smoke were believed to have powerful, purifying properties. The people and their precious livestock would be driven between two large bonfires. It was a ritual cleansing, a way to protect the herds from disease and to ensure their fertility in the coming year. A young man might leap over the flames to bring himself good fortune or to find a wife. It was a direct, physical engagement with a sacred element, a way of drawing the power of the sun into the community. Beltane was also a festival of unabashed fertility. The rules of normal society were relaxed. Young men and women would spend the night in the woods, gathering flowers and greenery to decorate the village at dawn. This was a time for courtship and for celebrating the life force that was surging through all of nature. The union of the god and goddess was mirrored in the unions of the people. This was not seen as sinful. It was a sacred participation in the great mystery of creation, ensuring the fertility of the people, as well as their crops and cattle. When the new Christian faith arrived, it embraced the hopeful light of Imbolc and reinterpreted the solemn darkness of Samhain. But Beltane was different. Its wildness, its open celebration of earthly passions and fertility, was a direct challenge to the new morality. The Church saw the Beltane rituals not as a sacred celebration of life, but as a dangerous, chaotic, and sinful pagan rite. The bonfires, the dancing, and the freedom of the festival were seen as the work of the devil. This joyous festival was now cast as a dark and wicked thing. The effort to suppress Beltane was long and determined. Preachers condemned the bonfires as demonic. The gatherings in the woods were forbidden. The old ways were driven underground, but they did not disappear entirely. Like Samhain, Beltane survived by changing its clothes, by being tamed. Its wild, chaotic spirit was domesticated into a much more orderly and innocent celebration, one that could be accepted by the new culture. The untamed forest was replaced by the village green, and the wild bonfire was replaced by a tall, decorated pole. This was the birth of the May Day festival. The most potent symbol of this taming is the maypole. Imagine a tall pole set up in the center of the village. Ribbons are attached to the top, and young people, dressed in their finest clothes, weave intricate patterns as they dance around it. It seems like a charming, innocent celebration of spring. But the maypole is a ghost. It is a faint, sanitized echo of a much more powerful and ancient symbol of fertility. It represents the tree of life, the center of the world, tamed and brought into the village square. The wild freedom of the Beltane night was replaced by the crowning of a May Queen. A young girl from the village would be chosen to represent the spirit of spring and fertility. She would be adorned with a crown of flowers and would preside over the day's festivities. This was a way of containing the powerful female energy of the original festival, personifying it in a single, innocent figure. The powerful, unpredictable land goddess was transformed into a well-behaved village girl for a day. The sacred had become a pageant. For a young person living in a medieval village, May Day was a welcome holiday. It was a day of dancing, games, and community celebration. They would dance around the maypole, laughing and weaving the ribbons, without any knowledge of its ancient meaning. They were celebrating the arrival of spring, just as their ancestors had. But the deep, cosmic reason for the celebration had been forgotten. The feeling of joy was the same, but the belief that their actions were essential to keeping the world alive was gone. The ritual had become a simple tradition. Even in this tamed form, the May Day festival was seen as suspicious by the most zealous religious reformers. During certain periods of history, maypoles were banned and cut down, seen as scandalous pagan symbols. But the tradition was too deeply loved by the people. It always came back. The instinct to celebrate the arrival of warmth and life after a long winter is a powerful human impulse. The maypole and the May Queen were the acceptable faces of this impulse, allowing the spirit of Beltane to survive in plain sight. What about the other fire festivals? Imbolc, the festival of the first light in February, had an easier transformation. Its themes of purity, hope, and returning light fit comfortably with Christian ideas. As we saw, it was absorbed into the feast day of Saint Brigid. It also became connected to another Christian holiday called Candlemas. On this day, all the candles that would be used in the church for the entire year were blessed. It was a festival of holy light, a perfect Christian reflection of the Celtic festival of the growing sun. Imagine a woman in the ancient world lighting a single candle in her home to honor the goddess Brigid and to encourage the sun's return. Now imagine a woman centuries later attending a Candlemas service. She watches as the priest blesses hundreds of candles, their light filling the dark church. The form of the ritual has changed entirely. The prayer is now to a different god, but the core feeling, the deep human need for light in the darkest part of the year, remains the same. The candle is still a symbol of hope against the winter gloom. Lughnasadh, the great harvest festival of August, also underwent a quiet transformation. It was a celebration of the first fruits of the harvest and a time for large tribal gatherings. Its timing was close to the Christian festival of Lammas, the day the first loaf of bread from the new wheat was blessed. The focus on the harvest remained, but the context changed. Thanks was no longer given to the god Lugh for his victory over famine. Instead, the community gathered in the church to give thanks to the Christian God for his provision. The great tribal assemblies of Lughnasadh, where laws were made and games were played, slowly faded away. They were replaced by local harvest fairs. These fairs were still a time for the community to come together. People would sell their produce, compete in games of skill, and celebrate the end of the summer's hard work. But the gathering was no longer a sacred tribal duty. It was a social and economic event. The festival that once reaffirmed the bonds of the tribe now served to reaffirm the bonds of the local marketplace. So we see a pattern emerge. The old festivals, tied to the rhythms of the earth, were too powerful to be completely destroyed. Instead, they were absorbed, reinterpreted, and tamed. The wild, passionate energy of Beltane was channeled into the orderly dance of the Maypole. The solemn, terrifying mystery of Samhain was reframed as a night of saints and souls. The hopeful light of Imbolc became the blessed candles of the church. The tribal pride of Lughnasadh became the community fun of the harvest fair. This process of forgetting took centuries. It was not an event, but a slow, gradual fading. With each generation, the memory of the old gods grew dimmer. The stories were still told, but they were increasingly seen as just stories, tales of a mythical long ago that had no real bearing on the present. The rituals became folk customs, things people did because it's what we've always done. The deep, sacred why behind the traditions was lost, leaving only the hollowed-out what. By the time the modern world began to take shape, with the rise of cities and industry, these traditions were seen as little more than quaint country customs. They were remnants of a superstitious, uneducated past. For people living in crowded cities, working in factories, and embracing the new age of science and reason, the old festivals seemed like childish fantasies. The great wheel of the year, which had governed human life for thousands of years, was replaced by the mechanical ticking of the clock. The connection to the land was broken for many people. They no longer planted the seeds or harvested the crops. Their lives were not governed by the sun and the moon, but by the factory whistle and the weekly wage. In this new world, what was the point of celebrating the first harvest or the return of the sun? These events no longer had a direct impact on their survival. The festivals, which had once been the very engine of the cosmos, became irrelevant to the rhythms of modern life. And so, the ghosts of the ancient festivals faded even further. May Day celebrations became smaller, often just events for school children. The Harvest Festival became a simple church decoration. The bonfires that once lit up the hills on Beltane and Samhain were largely extinguished, remembered only in a few remote villages. It seemed as though the final victory of the new world was complete. The ancient rituals, having survived religious change, now seemed to be dying a final death from simple neglect. But a strange thing happens when something is completely lost. It leaves behind an empty space. In the 20th and 21st centuries, a new feeling began to grow in the modern world. It was a feeling of disconnection, a sense of being cut off from nature, from a deeper history, and from a sense of the sacred. People began to feel that in gaining the whole world of technology and progress, they had perhaps lost something essential. They began to search for what was missing. This search led them back into the past. They began to read the old myths that the monks had written down. They studied the work of folklorists who had collected the stories and customs of the countryside before they vanished. Archaeologists were uncovering the ruins of ancient temples and the tombs of forgotten kings. A picture of that lost Celtic world began to emerge from the mists of time, incomplete and mysterious, but also powerful and alluring. People were drawn to this old world for many reasons. Some saw in it a more respectful relationship with nature, a way of life that saw the earth as a living being, not just a resource to be used. Others were drawn to the powerful female figures, the great goddesses and queens, who were so different from the patriarchal figures of the major world religions. For many, it was simply a search for roots, a desire to connect with the beliefs of their most distant ancestors. This growing interest led to a new movement. People didn't just want to read about the old ways, they wanted to experience them. They began to reconstruct the ancient rituals. They studied the folklore, the mythology, and the archaeology, and they tried to piece together how their ancestors might have worshipped. They called themselves modern pagans or neo-druids. They were not trying to perfectly recreate the past, which they knew was impossible. They were trying to build a new spiritual path inspired by the old one. And the first thing they did was to relight the ancient fires. They began to celebrate the great wheel of the year once more. Small groups of people began to gather in fields and on hillsides to mark the passing of the seasons. They celebrated Samhain not as Halloween, but as a time to honor the ancestors. They celebrated Beltane not with a maypole, but with a great bonfire. They were attempting to breathe life back into the old gods, and to find the sacred meaning that had been lost for so long. Imagine a young person today, standing before a bonfire on a hilltop on Beltane night. They are not a Celt from 2,000 years ago. They live in the modern world of smartphones and the internet, but as they watch the flames leap into the dark sky, they feel a connection to the turning of the earth, to the coming of summer, and to the countless generations of people who have stood before such a fire, feeling the same warmth and the same sense of wonder. This revival is happening all over the world. In Edinburgh, Scotland, a massive Beltane fire festival now attracts thousands of people every year. It is a huge spectacle of fire, drumming, and costumed performers reenacting the myth of the changing seasons. It is not an ancient religious ritual, but it is not just a party either. It is a conscious, artistic attempt to reconnect with the spirit of the ancient festival, to create a new kind of community celebration that honors the power of nature. Similarly, modern Samhain gatherings focus on the original spirit of the festival. People build altars to their ancestors, sharing stories and photographs of loved ones who have passed away. It is a quiet, reflective, and deeply personal way of observing the night. They are reclaiming Samhain from its commercialized Halloween form, stripping away the plastic monsters and the sugary treats to find the solemn, sacred heart that had been buried for so long. It is a search for authenticity in a world that often feels artificial. This revival of the old festivals is not a return to the past. It is the creation of something new. The world of the ancient Celts is gone forever. We cannot believe in exactly the same way they did, because our world is so profoundly different. A modern person cannot truly know what it felt like to believe that the river was a living goddess, or that the harvest depended on a ritual. But they can find meaning in the symbols and stories that have been left behind. The festivals provide a framework, a map of the year that connects us to the cycles of the natural world. In a life that is often lived indoors, under artificial light, these celebrations force us to pay attention. They make us notice the first signs of spring at Imbolc, the peak of the sun's power at the summer solstice, the falling leaves of Samhain, and the deep stillness of winter. They re-enchant the world, reminding us that we are part of a larger, living system. For the people who practice these revived traditions, the festivals have regained their why. The celebration is not just a tradition, it is a spiritual practice. It is a way to align themselves with the flow of nature, to honor the memory of those who came before, and to build a community with others who share their values. They have looked at the ghosts of the ancient rituals and have decided to give them new bodies, new life for a new time. So the long echo of the Celtic world is not just a faint dying sound. In some ways, it is growing louder. The very forces that seem to destroy the old ways, the spread of information, the mixing of cultures, are now the very forces that are allowing them to be rediscovered. A person in America can read an ancient Irish myth online, watch a video of a Beltane festival in Scotland, and connect with other people around the world who are also on this path of rediscovery. This brings us to a fascinating point in our story. The ancient rituals have traveled on two separate paths into the modern world. One path is the path of folk tradition. This is the path of Halloween and May Day. On this path, the custom survived, but the original meaning was forgotten. The festival became a secular, commercialized holiday, a ghost of its former self, unknowingly practiced by millions. It is a legacy that is broad but shallow. The other path is the path of conscious revival. This is the path of the modern pagan and neo-Druid communities. On this path, the original meaning is the most important thing. The customs are being rebuilt and reimagined in an attempt to reconnect with the sacred spirit of the festivals. This legacy is not practiced by millions, but by a dedicated few. It is a legacy that is narrow, but deep. These two paths have now arrived in the same modern world. So when we look at our modern festivals, we are looking at a complex, layered history. We see the faint outlines of the ancient Celtic world, the powerful overlay of Christian reinterpretation, the stubborn survival of folk tradition, the overwhelming influence of modern commerce, and now the small but growing movement of conscious revival. All these forces have shaped the way we celebrate today. They are the invisible currents that flow beneath the surface of our holidays. Let us return to the child in the superhero costume we met at the beginning of our journey. They are holding their bucket of candy, a participant in the modern festival of Halloween. They have no idea about Samhain, about the Druids, about the thin veil between the worlds. But the very act they are performing is a distant echo of the ancient rituals. The costume is the ghost of the animal skins worn for disguise. The trip from house to house is the ghost of souling. The candy is the ghost of the soul cake. This child does not need to know the history to enjoy the festival, but knowing the story enriches the experience. It adds a layer of depth and mystery to our familiar traditions. It allows us to see the long, unbroken thread that connects our world of streetlights and suburbs to a forgotten world of sacred groves and bonfires. It shows us that the past is never truly gone. It is still here, living inside our modern customs, waiting to be rediscovered. The journey of the ancient rituals is a story of survival. It shows how powerful ideas can endure even when the civilizations that created them have vanished. They survive by adapting, by changing their names and their meanings to fit new worlds. They hide in plain sight, disguised as children's games, folk tales, and modern holidays. They become so familiar that we forget to ask where they came from. We forget that our simplest traditions may have the deepest and most surprising roots. The power of these festivals lies in their connection to the fundamental rhythms of life, the cycle of light and dark, of birth and death, of planting and harvesting. These are universal human experiences. The Celts created a powerful system of ritual to mark and navigate these cycles. And even though their specific beliefs have faded for most of us, our human need to mark these moments has not. We still feel a sense of hope in the spring and a sense of reflection in the autumn. The Celtic worldview saw the whole world as alive, as a great story in which everything and everyone had a part to play. Their festivals were the moments when the community came together to actively participate in that story, to ensure it continued in the right way. That is what has been lost the most, the sense of participation in a cosmic drama. Our modern holidays are often passive. We receive them as days off work, as opportunities for consumption. But the revival of these ancient traditions shows a hunger for that lost sense of participation, a desire to do more than just observe the season, but to actively welcome it, a desire to do more than just remember the dead, but to actively honor them. It is a search for a more meaningful way to mark the passing of time, a way that connects us to our environment, our history, and our communities. It is an attempt to rejoin the story. We have now unraveled the long and complex journey of these rituals. We have followed them from the deep past, through a process of transformation and forgetting, and into two different kinds of life in the modern world. We have seen how the ancient night of Samhain became Halloween, and how the joyous fires of Beltane became the innocent dances of May Day. We have answered the question of how the ancient inspired the modern. The story shows that nothing is ever truly lost. It is only transformed. The gods become saints or fairies. The sacred groves become the sites of churches. The rituals become games. The great cosmic dramas become ghost stories. The energy of these ancient beliefs did not disappear. It was simply channeled into new forms, like a river being diverted into new channels. It still flows, even if we no longer recognize the source. So let us stand at the end of our journey and look back one more time. We see the grinning pumpkin on the doorstep. We now know its ancestor was a turnip, carved with a fearsome face to ward off wandering spirits on a night when the dead walked the earth. We know that the turnip lantern itself was a replacement for a torch lit from a sacred bonfire, a piece of the sun brought into the home to keep the family safe through the darkest night of the year. We see the child asking for candy. We now know that this act is the descendant of the poor going door to door, offering prayers for the souls of the dead in exchange for a soul cake. And we know that this practice itself was a Christianized version of a much older tradition, leaving offerings of food and drink to appease the powerful and often dangerous spirits of the other world who could cross into our reality when the veil was thin. And we see the costume, a sheet thrown over the head to look like a ghost or the mask of a monster. We now understand that this is the final echo of a deeply serious ritual, the act of disguising oneself to hide from the malevolent forces that were believed to be at large on Samhain night. It was a matter of survival, a way to camouflage oneself in a world that had temporarily descended into supernatural chaos. Our night of make-believe was born from a night of genuine belief. Every element of our modern festival has a story, a deep history that stretches back through the centuries, back through one religion to another, all the way to the bonfires of the ancient Celts. To know this story is to look at the familiar world with new eyes. It is to see the ghosts of the past hiding in our present. It is to understand that we are still connected to that ancient world, whether we know it or not. The core concept of these ancient rituals was about maintaining balance, the balance between light and dark, summer and winter, life and death, our world and the other world. The festivals were the moments when this balance was most fragile, and humanity had to play its part to help set it right. That is the great idea that inspired it all. The idea that we are not just passengers on the earth, but caretakers of its sacred cycles. So, the final question is not what we have lost, but what we can still find. What do these ancient stories have to offer us now, in our world of concrete and steel? They offer a reminder that time is not just a clock ticking on a wall. It is a cycle, a rhythm. They remind us that the world around us is not just dead matter, but a living system of which we are a part. And they remind us that we have ancestors, a long chain of humanity stretching back into the deep past. The great rituals of the Celts were an attempt to answer the most basic human questions. How do we face the coming of darkness and the fear of death? How do we celebrate the return of light and the miracle of life? How do we honor those who came before us? And how do we find our proper place in the great story of the world? These questions are as relevant to us today as they were to the people who lived in the ancient forests 2,000 years ago. Our modern festivals, in their own chaotic and commercialized way, are still trying to answer these questions. Halloween still gives us a way to confront our fears with laughter. Holiday parties still bring us together against the winter cold. These celebrations are the faint but unbroken echoes of our ancestors, attempts to make sense of the world. They are the ghosts of the great wheel, still turning, silently, beneath the surface of our modern lives. Let us take a moment and feel this connection. Picture a modern family gathering in their warm kitchen to carve a pumpkin. The television is on. The world outside is busy. They laugh as they scoop out the seeds and decide on a funny or a scary face. They are participating in a simple, happy tradition. But the light they are about to place inside that pumpkin is a descendant of a flame that was once believed to be the only thing keeping a family safe from a world of spirits. The act of carving a protective face is an echo of a time when such a symbol was a desperate plea for safety. The emotions have been transformed as much as the rituals. The ancient family, huddling by their hearth on Samhain night, felt a profound and genuine fear of the unknown. They also felt a deep, sacred connection to their ancestors, whom they believed were just outside the door. Today, the fear we seek on Halloween is a controlled thrill, the excitement of a scary movie or a haunted house. Our connection is not to the spirits, but to our community, to the shared experience of the festival. The sacred has been replaced by the social. Yet, there is a reason these particular traditions survived. When so many others faded away, they speak to something deep within us. The act of putting on a mask allows us, for one night, to explore a different side of ourselves. It is a moment of freedom from the constraints of our everyday identity. This desire for transformation, to become something other than what we are, is a powerful human impulse. The ancient Celts used it for sacred camouflage. We use it for play, but the underlying psychological need is remarkably similar. The same is true for the joy of Beltane's echo, the May Day celebration. The desire to gather outside after a long winter, to see the world green again, and to celebrate with music and dance is not something that needed to be taught. It is an instinct. A modern person enjoying a spring festival in a park is answering the same call of the warming earth that their distant ancestors did. The context and the beliefs have changed, but the fundamental human response to the turning of the seasons remains a constant, powerful force. These festivals, in their ancient form, were a kind of technology. They were a spiritual technology for managing the psychological challenges of life. Samhain was a tool for processing grief and confronting the fear of death and darkness. Beltane was a tool for channeling the powerful energies of life and fertility. The rituals gave people a structured, communal way to engage with the most powerful forces of their existence. They were not just parties, they were essential for the psychological well-being of the community, helping them navigate the highs and lows of the year. And today, we still use their ghosts for the same purpose, even if we don't realize it. Halloween allows us to explore our fears in a safe container. Christmas and other winter holidays, which share roots with the winter solstice traditions, provide light and community to combat the darkest time of the year. Spring festivals renew our sense of hope. We have stripped away the old gods and the specific rituals, but we have kept the underlying psychological function. We still need these moments of communal release, reflection, and celebration to navigate our own lives. The story of these festivals is also a story about memory. A society's memory is not stored in books alone. It is stored in the things we do, the songs we sing, and the holidays we celebrate. These traditions are like old trees. The outer bark, the part we see, is modern, but if you were to cut it open, you would see the rings of its history, stretching back into a dark and hidden center. Each ring is a layer of time, a layer of Celtic belief, of Christian reinterpretation, of folk custom, of commercialism. All are part of the tree. Forgetting is a natural part of this process. For the traditions to survive through times of great change, the original meanings often had to be forgotten. If people had consciously remembered that the maypole was a powerful pagan symbol of fertility, it would have been cut down for good. It survived precisely because it became seen as an innocent game for children. Sometimes, for an idea to live, its true name must be whispered so softly that it eventually becomes a secret, even from itself. But now we live in an age of remembering. We have the tools to look back, to read the old stories, and to piece together the puzzle of the past. This act of remembering is changing the festivals once again. For some, learning the history of Halloween adds a new layer of spooky fun. For others, it inspires them to seek out a deeper, more spiritual connection, to join a modern pagan group and light a bonfire in honor of the ancestors. The story is no longer just fading, it is actively being rediscovered and rewritten. This brings us to the beauty of the long echo. An echo is not the original sound, but it carries its shape, its tone. Our modern festivals are not the original rituals, but they carry the shape of their ancestors, concerns, life, death, community, and the turning of the earth. They are distorted and faint, but they are not silent. They are a conversation across time. By celebrating them, we are, in our own way, answering a call that was first sent out thousands of years ago. Consider the landscape itself, the final keeper of memory. In the quiet corners of Ireland, Scotland, and across Europe, the old places still exist. The stone circles still stand, silent witnesses to forgotten rituals. The ancient burial mounds, known as fairy hills, still hold the secrets of the people who built them. These are not just tourist attractions. For the people who lived in the ancient world, these places were alive with power. They were the gateways to the other world, the focal points of their entire spiritual geography. To stand in one of these places is to feel the weight of time. To place your hand on a stone that was raised by people 4,000 years ago is to touch a different reality. You can feel the faint echo of their world. You can almost hear the chanting of the druids, almost see the flicker of the festival fire. These places remind us that our modern world is just a thin layer, a new coat of paint on a very, very old house. The foundations of that house are still there, deep in the earth. These places were the stage for the great festivals. The bonfire on the Hill of Tara in Ireland was said to be the first one lit at Samhain. From that sacred fire, all the other fires in the land were kindled. The place itself was part of the ritual's power. Today, when modern pagans gather to celebrate, they often seek out these ancient sites. They are trying to go back to the source, to stand where their ancestors stood, to feel the same earth beneath their feet and see the same stars above. This connection to place is something largely missing from our modern celebrations. Our Halloween takes place in a generic suburb, a decorated mall, a city street. It is detached from the land, from the harvest, from the cycles of nature that gave it birth. This is perhaps the greatest difference between the ancient and the modern. The old festivals were about the relationship between a specific people and a specific land. Our modern versions have become global commodities, able to be celebrated anywhere, but perhaps truly belonging nowhere. And yet, the instinct remains. The reason we decorate our homes with the colors of autumn, the oranges, browns, and reds, is a subconscious acknowledgement of the season. We are bringing the dying of the world into our homes, just as our ancestors did. We are marking the end of the harvest, the turning of the great wheel, even if we do not use those words. The symbols of the harvest, the pumpkins, the corn stalks, the apples, are the quiet heart of Halloween, a link to the festival's agricultural roots that has survived everything. The Celtic worldview did not die, it simply dissolved into the stream of culture. Its ideas were so powerful that they flowed into new channels, shaping stories and traditions that we now think of as our own. The idea of a magical otherworld, hidden just out of sight, became the foundation for countless fairy tales and fantasy stories. The brave heroes, the wise women, the magical swords, so many of these ideas have their roots in the myths that were once told around a Samhain fire. So the legacy is not just in the festivals. It is in our stories. It is in our relationship with the natural world. It is in the names of our rivers and hills. The spirit of that ancient world is woven into the tapestry of our own in ways we can no longer easily see. It has become part of the background noise of our culture, but once you learn to listen for it, you can begin to hear it everywhere. You can see the shadow of the druid behind the wizard, and the face of the Morrigan behind the wicked queen. This journey into the past reveals that our modern world is not as new as we think. We carry the ghosts of our ancestors within us. Their fears, their hopes, and their ways of making sense of the universe are embedded in our simplest traditions. A festival is a living fossil. It is a creature from a lost world that has managed, against all odds, to survive into the present. It may look different, it may behave differently, but its bones, its ancient structure, are still there if you know how to look. We have seen how a night of profound spiritual danger, a negotiation with the forces of life and death, became a night of harmless fun for children. The process was slow, complex, and driven by huge historical forces: the rise and fall of religions, the migration of peoples, and the birth of the modern commercial world. It was not a single event, but 1,000 years of forgetting and reimagining. A sacred idea was passed from hand to hand, and with each passing it was slightly changed until its original form was unrecognizable. But the core impulse, the human need to gather as a community and confront the darkness, survived. That is the thread that connects the ancient bonfire to the modern porchlight. It is the thread of our shared humanity, the desire to find light in the darkness, to find life in the midst of decay, to feel a connection to something larger than ourselves. This is what the ancient rituals were for, and this is the need our modern festivals, in their own imperfect way, still try to meet. The Celts believed that the two worlds, ours and the other world, were closest at Samhain. Perhaps we can think of time in the same way. The past and the present are two different worlds, but on the night of a great festival, the veil between them becomes thin. When we participate in a tradition that is centuries old, we are for a moment reaching back and touching the world of our ancestors. We are standing in the same river of time that they stood in. The experience connects the two worlds. So when you see the symbols of a modern festival, a pumpkin, a maypole, a candle in the window, you can now see them as artifacts. They are like pieces of ancient pottery, unearthed from the ground. They are beautiful and interesting on their own, but their true value is in the story they tell about the people who made them. They are clues to a lost world, tangible pieces of a story that stretches back into the mists of time. They are the last will and testament of our forgotten ancestors. And what is the inheritance they left us? They left us a calendar of the soul, a way of marking the year not by months and dates, but by feelings and energies. A time for hope, a time for joy, a time for gratitude, and a time for solemn reflection. They gave us a way to structure our emotional lives in harmony with the world around us. This map is still there, hidden beneath our modern calendar, and we can still choose to follow it if we wish. The journey from ancient ritual to modern festival is not a story of loss, but of transformation. It is a testament to the resilience of culture and the enduring power of human imagination. It shows that even the most powerful forces of history cannot completely erase the deep instincts of the human heart. The names of the gods may be forgotten and the words of the prayers may be lost, but the fire, the feast, and the gathering of the community remain. Let us think about the child from our first scene one last time. They are at home after a long night of trick-or-treating. Their costume is off, and their candy is spread across the floor. They are tired but happy. For them, the night was a simple adventure, but they have just walked a path that was laid down for them thousands of years ago. They have worn a mask to ward off spirits. They have carried a light in the darkness. They have asked for offerings at the doors of their neighbors. They have participated in the ghost of an ancient ritual. And in doing so, they have become another link in a very long chain. A chain that connects the 21st century back through the Middle Ages, back through the coming of Christianity, all the way to a small group of people huddled around a fire in an ancient dark forest. The child is keeping the memory alive, even without knowing it. The tradition flows through them to the next generation. The echo continues its long journey into the future, carried in a plastic bucket full of candy. Our story has taken us across thousands of years and deep into the heart of a lost world. We started with a simple question: how did an ancient, terrifying night of spirits become a modern festival of treats and fun? We have discovered that the answer is not simple. It is a long, winding story of how beliefs are blended, how rituals adapt, and how the deepest human instincts for celebration and community can survive even the most profound changes. The ancient rituals were powerful because they were alive. They were not just traditions performed out of habit. They were seen as essential acts that kept the world in balance. The people felt the presence of their gods and their ancestors all around them. That is the world that inspired our festivals. A world where the supernatural was natural, where myth was history, and where the most important work a person could do was to honor the sacred cycles of the earth. The Great Transformation happened when that living world began to fade. As the old gods retreated into the fairy hills and the veil to the other world grew thicker, the rituals lost their sense of urgent necessity. They became customs, then games, then commercial products. The process was a slow draining of the sacred, a hollowing out of the ancient meaning, until only the outer shell of the performance remained. That shell is what we have inherited. But we have also inherited something else. We've inherited the questions the rituals were designed to answer. We still look up at the night sky and wonder about our place in the universe. We still feel a sense of loss when a loved one dies. We still feel a surge of joy when we see the first flowers of spring. We are still the same human beings, with the same fears and the same hopes. We are still searching for meaning in the turning of the seasons. The modern world offers us few tools for this search. Our culture is loud, fast, and often disconnected from the natural rhythms of the planet. This is why the pull of the past can be so strong. The story of these ancient festivals offers us a glimpse of a different way of being in the world, a way that is slower, more connected, and more aware of the subtle energies of the landscape and the seasons. It offers a sense of depth in a world that can often feel shallow. And so, the inspiration flows both ways. The ancient rituals inspired our modern festivals, giving them their shape and their symbols. But now, our modern world, with its feelings of disconnection, is inspiring some of us to look back to the ancient rituals in search of what has been lost. The echo is beginning to travel back towards the original sound. People are trying to listen to the old stories again, to learn their language, and to find new ways to make them meaningful. The future of these festivals is unwritten. Will they become even more commercialized, their last connections to the past finally severed? Or will the growing movement of revival continue to breathe new life into them, reinfusing them with a sense of the sacred? Perhaps the two paths will continue to exist side by side, the broad, shallow river of the commercial holiday and the deep, narrow stream of the spiritual revival. What is certain is that the story is not over. As long as the seasons turn, as long as people gather to celebrate, the long echo of the Celtic world will continue to be heard. It will adapt, it will change its form, but it will not fall silent. The need to mark the passing of time, to confront the darkness, and to celebrate the light is too fundamental a part of what it means to be human. The ancient fire was never truly put out. We have traveled far, from the primal fear of a world dissolving into darkness to the innocent laughter of a child in a costume. We have witnessed the birth, transformation, and rebirth of traditions that have shaped our world in quiet ways. We have seen how the most sacred beliefs can become the most common games. Now, we arrive at the end of our journey, ready to finally and fully answer the question that we asked at the very beginning. We began with a paradox, a modern night of joy and make-believe, and its ancestor, an ancient night of profound fear and sacred duty. How did one become the other? The answer is that it did not simply become the other. The new did not replace the old. Instead, the old was buried beneath the new. Layer upon layer of history, belief, and culture were placed on top of that ancient foundation, until the original structure was completely hidden from view. The first layer was a new religion. Christianity took the powerful, chaotic night of Samhain and gave it a new name and a new story. It became All Hallows' Eve, a night to think about saints and souls, demons, and the devil. The old spirits were not banished. They were simply redefined as forces of evil. The old rituals of bonfires and costumes were not forbidden. They were given new Christian meanings. The festival was captured. The next layer was time itself. As centuries passed, the memory of the Druids and the Celtic gods faded. The Christianized rituals slowly detached from their religious meaning and became folk traditions. People continued to play the games, tell the stories, and carve the lanterns, but they did so out of custom, not religious conviction. The sacred duty had become a beloved superstition, a comfortable habit passed down through generations who had forgotten its original purpose. The next layer was Migration. The traditions, kept alive in the folk culture of Ireland and Scotland, were carried across the ocean to a new world. In America, they were planted in new soil and they began to change. The sacred turnip met the plentiful pumpkin. The old traditions mixed with the customs of many other cultures in a great melting pot. The festival shed even more of its old spiritual skin, becoming a secular, community celebration. The final and thickest layer was commerce. In the 20th century, the holiday was discovered by the modern marketplace. It was found to be a perfect vehicle for selling candy, costumes, and decorations. This final layer covered everything that came before with a bright, colorful, and artificial coating. It turned the ancient symbols into products and the communal rituals into opportunities for consumption. The transformation was now complete. The terrifying had become trivial. So, the grinning pumpkin on our doorstep is not the descendant of a human head, as our opening story suggested. But that provocative image contains a deeper truth. It is the descendant of a genuine and powerful fear. It is the final, tamed, and friendly face of an ancient terror, a terror of the dark, of the dead, of a world where the rules of reality could break down. We have kept the symbol, but we have inverted its meaning, turning a shield against fear into a symbol of fun. This is how the ancient ritual inspired the modern festival. It provided the bones, the deep structure that is still hidden beneath the surface, the date on the calendar, the theme of supernatural beings, the practice of costumes and offerings. All these are the direct legacy of the Celtic world. But the heart, the soul, the sacred meaning of the ritual was replaced. It was replaced by a Christian heart, then a folk heart, and finally a commercial heart. To understand this journey is to understand something profound about history itself. The past is not a foreign country that we can visit. It is the foundation of the house in which we are still living. Its wiring is still in the walls. Its plumbing is still in the ground. We may have redecorated the rooms, but we are still shaped and constrained by the original design. Our modern festivals are rooms in this ancient house. The story of Samhain and Beltane is a perfect lesson in this. It shows us that our culture is a layered, living thing, not a static object. It is constantly changing, absorbing, and reinterpreting the past. Nothing is ever created from nothing. Our brightest modern ideas are often just new blossoms on very old roots. And sometimes, the most important parts of our world are the parts that have become so familiar that they are invisible to us. To see these invisible connections is to re-enchant the world. It is to look at a simple holiday and see 1,000 years of human history. It is to feel the presence of the distant past in the most ordinary moments of the present. It brings a sense of depth, of meaning, and of wonder to the familiar landscape of our own lives. It reminds us that we are part of a story that is much bigger and much older than we are. The desire to connect with that story is a powerful one. It is why people today are relighting the ancient fires. They are digging through the layers, trying to find that ancient foundation. They are looking for the original why behind the rituals. They are trying to build a new house on the old ground, one that makes sense for the modern world, but is still connected to the deep magic of the past. The ancient rituals gave people a sense of their place in the cosmos. They stood between the land and the sky, between the living and the dead, and they played their part. They were not just observers, they were participants. This is perhaps the greatest inspiration the ancient world can offer us. The idea that we are not separate from the world, but are woven into its fabric, and that our actions, our rituals, and our celebrations matter. So the next time you see a carved pumpkin, or a group of children in costume, you will see it differently. You will see not just a moment of modern fun, but the end result of a 2,000-year journey. You will see the faint, flickering ghost of a sacred fire. You will hear the distant, quiet echo of an ancient chant. You will understand that you are looking at a story written in the language of time itself. The past is never dead. It is not even past. It breathes in our customs, it sleeps in our stories, and it wakes in our celebrations. The ancient Celts, their druids, and their gods may be gone, but they left behind a map of the turning year, a map of how to face the darkness and how to celebrate the light. And we, their most distant descendants, are still following that map, even when we cannot read the words. The greatest rituals are not about gods or spirits, they are about us. They are about our relationship with time, with nature, with our communities, and with the great mystery of life and death. The ancient world created a powerful language of symbol and ceremony to speak about these things. We have forgotten much of that language, but we can still feel its poetry. And that poetry is the long, quiet, and unbroken echo that we call a festival.